My name is Brandon Digia, and I stream under the handle Accessible Gamer.
It's okay. That's what scrimmages are for.
I have been a Twitch streamer for the past 4 years now.
Good job, everybody. Good job. Well played.
I'm an accessibility advocate, public speaker, and community organizer and general rabble rouser.
Like, just going back to the root of everything, like, what was your first experience with video games?
Oh man. When I was maybe about 5 or 6 years old, um, my dad bought an 8-bit Nintendo system for the family, mid 80s, and I remember playing Legend of Zelda with him, and he had actually mapped out the entire ninth dungeon to get the Triforce and defeat Ganon. And I remember how he painstakingly drew a map, it went from room to room to room and where you're supposed to go. And I actually used that. I think that was my first experience with a walkthrough.
That's so sweet.
Yeah. Up until the point I was injured, I had a PlayStation 2. I had a fairly powerful, by those standards at the time, fairly powerful computer that could play games like Unreal Tournament or what have you. And I was it definitely enjoying gaming. And one of the most frustrating things is when you're in like a hospital situation and you can't get out of bed, much less hold a controller, and you see commercials for, gosh, at the time, what was big at the time? Halo, like the original Halo.
Mm-hmm.
They were dropping new Final Fantasy titles. Kingdom Hearts, I think, had just come out for the first time. Games like real classics, and they all looked amazing, especially on TV, which was all I could do was watch. For the most part, was just watch TV.
Mm-hmm.
So you see those commercials, and it's just incredibly frustrating. So that's kind of how my journey with accessibility in gaming began.
Ooh. How long after your injury did you want to start picking up video games again?
Oh, almost. I mean, immediately. Absolutely, immediately. I was at the University of Michigan Hospital for about 2 months, maybe 2.5. In their first in their neurological ICU, and then after I stabilized a bit, to their rehabilitation ward or what have you. And one of they had a department there, and they managed to get a few extra devices in my room, like an environmental control unit, so I could control the television, and a few other things in the room without having to move or ask a nurse or something else like that. And yeah, the very first thing I wanted to do was get back to interacting with or with any computer, finding out ways that I could do that. And it was incredibly frustrating at first. But after a while, you figure out, once you eliminate all the things that you can't do, then you start looking at what you can. And that's kind of how it went from there. I started out with Dragon Naturally Speaking, and that was all I had. Um, and I was controlling a mouse by using, like, they have a mouse grid. So you say the word mouse grid and it divides the screen into like a or a 3x3 grid, and then you say the number, divides that into a 3x3 until you eventually narrow down to the spot you want the mouse to be, and then you say click.
And then what came next? Was it a desire to build your own atypical input device, or did you start looking for developers that were creating input devices?
I had found a trackball mouse that I could use. I think one of my siblings had found it for me. It was a Kensington 4-button trackball, and that allowed me to play turn-based games. So I could play Civilization or like Baldur's Gate, like the real-time with pause titles. And that was okay for the time being. There were a couple online communities that were talking about just having a spinal cord injury. So I was I was on one of them, and gaming was a topic that was brought up constantly because there isn't a whole lot to do, and boredom is can drive you mad. So anything to fight that, really, it's one of those things that, for the most part, the majority of people with physical disabilities would want to do with at least part of their time. Is just escape into another world. Ever since the Xbox Adaptive Controller has been released, I've noticed a couple things happen. First is that some people think that because this device exists, that accessibility has been quote solved, which could not be further from the truth. And also because I noticed a lot of the people who were showcasing the device were also holding a standard controller. And that's something I actually can't do because I'm paralyzed not only from the chest down, but also from the wrists up. So I can't move my fingers or thumbs or hold a controller of any kind. And I have to use what I call atypical input devices in order to interact with my computer and play the games that I play and stream myself doing so. So that's why I want to tell my story, because being a no-handed gamer is a much different experience than being a one-handed gamer, for example, or someone who can even manipulate a controller or half of a controller. All of the technology that you have to use is going to be expensive, difficult to service if possible, and very easy to break. There are people, thanks to 3D printing, that are looking to help drive these costs down. And I've spoken with people who work in medicine, like with physical and occupational therapy, and that's one of the things that frustrates them the most as well, is that they're often made of cheap plastic and simple soldering and wire. and they charge so incredibly much for them.
Yeah.
But that's hopefully one of the things that will change as we move forward in the next coming years, because that's, I think, where the next battleground for accessibility is going to be. You could share 3D print files so that people can make their own switches with a 3D printer. If someone came up with that, it could undercut a lot of companies that sell these things for 500 to 1,000% markup. It could even lead to some innovation. Another thing I'd like to see would be able-bodied gamers using the adaptive controller and messing around with some of the ability switches. I mean, if you could play a video game the same way you played a piano, I mean, that's something that you could literally set up with ease if you had 12.5 switches and this hub to tie it all into. So, I mean,
the world is rich with possibility.
yeah.
So just have...
I mean, I think of a lot of pro gamers who like define success by actions per minute. They'd be able to perform a lot more and a lot more quickly by having by not having to rely on thumbs, by being able to use all 10 digits, or even say, I mean, there are so many different types of switches. There are switches you can use by biting on them, or by just, there are buttons there are switches you can manipulate by holding a hand over them, or I mean, the possibilities literally are endless. And unfortunately, not many people who aren't occupational therapists use or see an occupational therapist know that. But I think it would be a really interesting thing for Microsoft to do, would be to have like a hackathon or some other similar event where people get like a basket full of switches, a video game, and an Xbox adaptive controller, and say, here's how it works, go to town. You have an hour, let's see what you come up with.
That would be awesome.
And I posed that idea to Bryce Johnson, so maybe we'll see that happen in the next year or two.
Cool. Because VR is like such a new thing, are there any like, do you see a point where you could be like, cool, let's start accessibility here for VR? Like, is there something?
As long as people don't like normalize the shape of and like feel of the game paddles, if they come up with other game paddles that use, I guess, maybe either different shapes or had different types of or different ways to control the VR title without using the paddles at all. That could be interesting and possibly even a more immersive experience. It's just something that gaming is just kind of like still dipping its toe into VR, and I think there's going to be a lot of failures along the way until the industry finally agrees on something, and hopefully accessibility will be factored into VR from the get-go.
And so, talking about devices, can you tell us more about your setup?
It's a Mayflash gamepad,
Mm-hmm.
and it came. It had like a joystick and 8 buttons. I can't really press more than 3 of them, but I unscrewed the ball from the joystick and kind of just crammed on an old like uh, goalpost shaped plastic controller that I used for my wheelchair, like my power wheelchair.
Yeah, yeah, it's the Y-shaped object that's on your. Okay,
Yeah,
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 yeah.
exactly. Yep. So I put, I can slide my, I can fit my hand the, onto like that goalpost shaped part, and I can then move the joystick forward, backwards, left, and right. But mostly, in most games, I only really have to move forward
Mm-hmm.
because I can control the direction uh, by uh, just by looking left and right,
Oh,
because
cool.
that just moves the mouse cursor.
Mm-hmm.
So if I need to go left, I can go forward and left at the same time, and that just is more or less, solves the issue. Sometimes it's a little bit harder if I'm playing a game where I have to drive a car, and it's controlled by WASD. I tend to veer off the road and run into things all the time. But I eventually get where I'm going.
Mm-hmm.
And I can, thanks to a bit of software called XPatter, I can remap all of those buttons. So if I'm playing a top-down simulator where I need to like zoom in and out or rotate the camera, instead of W, A, S, and D, I can rebind them to mouse scroll up and down, and then Q and E, which are traditionally used to zoom in and out or rotate the camera when you're playing one of those top-down strategy titles.
And then, so there, you also mentioned that there's a piece next to your mouth that allows you to
Yes.
puff air.
Yep. This is my sip and puff controller. It's actually about maybe 6 to 8 feet of plastic tubing, and it ends at a box. It will manipulate the switch in one direction, and it's connected to my computer like via USB. So it'll read the pressure switch going in one direction as a left click, and when if I puff air in the opposite direction, it will register that as a right click. So I'm able to left click, I'm able to right click. I can't do both at once.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Laws of physics are a harsh mistress, that's for sure. It's led me to appreciate game features I didn't appreciate before, like, for example, games that have the option to toggle aiming down sights, which is typically done by a right click. That's the games that have that feature are a lot easier for me to make it a lot easier for me to use that feature. So Warframe, for example, I can just do a quick sip and I'm aiming down the sights of the gun, and then I can empty a clip, and then another quick sip, and I'm back to normal and running around. In contrast with, say, a game like Borderlands 2, where I have to actually aim with a voice command, because otherwise I'd have to figure out some way to sip continually and then puff, which, yeah, totally impossible. I've tried. Doesn't work.
Cool. So you're using a mixture of your breath. There's eye tracking that's involved.
Actually, no. It's the cursor
Okay.
is moved by the infrared controller, so it's not tracking my eyes so much as it is tracking the reflective sticker that you can kind of see.
Cool.
Yeah, like a third eye.
Neat.
Yeah.
So it's a mixture then of infrared tracking, your breath, and then your physical input with your setup that you have down by your arms.
And then my voice.
And your voice. Right. And which was another thing that I saw in your stream is that you kept saying parkour.
Yes.
So
that's how I used that that one robust command that just is a rotating cycle of jumps and flips and slides and.
Oh yeah. So what are all of the softwares that you use?
So yeah, I use Voice Attack for all of the voice commands. I use Dragon Naturally Speaking whenever I have to input text. So if I have to create a character name, I'll usually run Dragon in spell mode. Some games it'll work with it just fine. I can actually say words and it'll put the words into the text box. Some games are really bad and I have to literally go character by character and say press echo and then press delta and so on and so forth. I use Xpatter in order to change what the joystick and the Xbox adaptive controller does. That's it on the software end.
In our first conversation about developers in games, going after the easy accessibility things. So, what are a few of those for you? What are the low-hanging fruit, as you mentioned?
As every type of disability is different, even within the same disability, symptoms can differ from person to person. There are some options that are easier to implement than others, and things that are easy to implement would be things like subtitles, button remapping, colorblind mode is becoming more and more popular and more widespread. Nowadays, though, if a game doesn't have button remapping, people think that's crazy. It's actually almost comical because it's an accessibility feature that able-bodied people utilize without really knowing that they're using an accessibility feature. But I'd like to see developers start attempting more challenging accessibility game options, such as audio cues for robust audio cues for gamers who are low vision or full blind, or text-to-speech menus for gamers who likewise have a visual disability, and then uh, also robust subtitles that show the name of the person talking, and or showing like text in the game whenever a person says a thing that's not like necessarily part of a cutscene. If you take my meaning, if you're in a game and you see an adversary and they yell something at you, you should be able to have the option to show that text with the character's name so that a person with auditory disabilities wouldn't miss out on things like that. And then obviously avoiding game features that rely on having sight or sound or physical ability. If you lock like game content behind a challenge like that, then the gamer doesn't get to experience the story and complete the game to a satisfactory end.
In order for developers to like create these more nuanced accessibility features, like what are some steps you'd like to see them take in their development process to incorporate these?
I think it's more a matter of just keeping accessibility in mind and talking to gamers with disabilities, finding ways to reach out to people. If, for example, if you're developing a game and you want to incorporate a feature, ask yourself, how would I be able to do this if I didn't have sight, or if and normally I totally facepalm at the idea of disability simulation, but I'd say in this case it's more a matter of empathy, really. Just putting oneself in another's shoes. And by having conversations with actual disabled people, you learn how they adapt to whatever challenges that they experience in these virtual worlds.
Yeah, is there an example of a game that you're able to play because of an added switch?
Borderlands, for example, Borderlands 2.
That should do it.
I have a set of voice commands that allow me to like switch which weapon I'm holding, jump, throw a grenade, etc. But if I had another button, I could bind that to jumping, and then I could jump without having to use the command. Every time I can not rely on a voice command that because I use voice commands for things that I probably shouldn't, like just bashing with your weapon. I never really I bind that maybe to a voice command if I have to use it to get past a certain area, but I otherwise would never use that feature because it's one thing too many. So every time you add a switch, at least in my own case, it's one more thing that I can do. You know, being able to jump rapidly or whenever I need to without having to use a voice command and time the latency just right so that you jump when you want to instead of embarrassingly milliseconds too late or what have you.
What has your I don't know, what was the experience like of building the community with accessible gamers and your Twitch team?
I started the Discord server first as like a place for gamers with disabilities to go and hang out and talk about being disabled or share tips about anything from gaming to surviving. And eventually that turned into something a bit more structured. And I started adding, moderators and other people that believe in what we're doing. Amazing, wonderful people that honestly I wouldn't. The whole thing would have died out ages ago if it weren't for them. Once it hit critical mass, it just kind of became a thing. And when we had the opportunity to make it a Twitch team, I kind of jumped at that. And now we have a team that is composed entirely of gamers with disabilities of all kinds and chronic illnesses as well. And we also are pride ourselves on being neurodiverse. So as inclusive as possible is the way I want to try to keep it. I'm just hoping that as more gamers with disabilities catch the performance bug, and a lot of them are, for one reason or another, they're getting into online performance. It's a great way to reach out, tell one story, but more importantly, be heard. And I think that's incredibly important for a lot of people, especially those who don't really get out much, like myself. The age of the average gamer is going up and up and up, no matter how many younger gamers get added to the mix. Like, gaming is now a multi-generational thing. There are even gamers that are twice my own age that love to play. But the more gamers reach, statistically speaking, the more gamers reach the age of 50 will have some sort of disability. I mean, even if it's just poor vision or arthritis or chronic pain or something to that effect. And I can't even tell you how many gamers I interact with that talk about having these issues. And I'm thinking to myself, my goodness, these guys are all accessible gamers and they don't even know it. But these features are going to be more in demand in the next few years because of that fact that the average age, or the age of the average gamer, is going up.
Interesting. But that also makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense.
We're actually going to be holding an accessibility roundtable on the Accessible Streamers Discord.
Cool.
At 5 p.m. Eastern, and I have absolutely no idea how long. Hopefully we want to talk about accessibility kind of in the post Xbox adaptive controller era.
Ooh, yeah.
So like where accessibility in gaming is going to go after, in the wake of such a game-changing development that was this device. So I'm trying to round up as many people as possible, and I hope it'll be at least a mildly interesting conversation.
Cool.
All right, cool.
Have a great night.
Thanks for doing this or letting me do this interview with you.
Of course. Thank you for your time, and have a great night.
I actually am very, very proud of you guys.